I never heard the house breathe until the day I realized it no longer belonged to me. The sound was faint at first, a low settling of timber, the whisper of pipes cooling behind the walls. But once I knew what she'd done, every noise became a pulse of betrayal. I used to love that creak at the top of the staircase. It was proof that the old bones of the house were alive. That time itself moved gently through the rooms. Now it sounded like a warning, like a throat clearing before the final sentence was spoken. My mother-in-law, Margaret, had always said a house is only as faithful as the woman who runs it. She'd said it on the day she handed me the keys, the first week after Daniel and I married. I was 26, wide-eyed, trying to impress her with politeness. "You'll take care of it," she'd said, smiling that slow, deliberate smile that never reached her eyes. "It's in the family trust, of course, but it's practically yours." At the time, I thought she was being generous. I didn't understand how the word practically could undo a life. For years, Margaret visited every Sunday, gliding through my kitchen like she still owned the air. She'd comment on the curtains, the garden, the way I stacked plates. I learned to keep her teacup at the edge of the counter. Never near the sink, she liked to lift it herself, as if I might poison her by pouring. Daniel said she just needed reassurance that he was happy, that she'd never truly accepted that he'd chosen someone unlike her. I told myself it was harmless. But Margaret's brand of love was like ivy, pretty at first, then slowly consuming the brick underneath. The first real sign came one winter morning when a man in a suit knocked on the door asking about the viewing. I thought he had the wrong address. He showed me an email from Carlisle, offering private tours for cash buyers. I laughed it off, assuming a scam, but that night Margaret called, casual as ever, asking if anyone had admired the house today. My stomach dropped. Daniel was away on business, unreachable. Her tone carried that bright cruelty she used when pretending to joke. I told myself she couldn't mean it, that it was one of her tests. But a week later, another stranger appeared, this one with a clipboard and measuring tape. He asked where the current owner was. I froze. "I am," I said. He gave me a look halfway between pity and confusion. "Mrs. Carlisle signed the preliminary papers," he said quietly. "We're just waiting on final signatures." That night, I searched through our documents. The mortgage, the deed, the trust papers. I realized Margaret had never transferred full ownership to Daniel or me. Everything we'd paid for, every repair, every wall we'd painted together, existed on paper as hers. She could sell it without even stepping inside. When Daniel returned, I showed him the evidence. He stared at the papers for a long time, then said, "She wouldn't actually do it." His voice lacked conviction. I saw the boy in him, 12 years old, sitting at his mother's piano, trying to earn her approval through obedience. That same weakness now sat across from me, unable to face the truth. Days passed. The calls from real estate agents multiplied. I stopped answering the door. The house began to feel watched, as if the walls themselves were preparing for a new owner. I moved from room to room, trying to anchor myself. I baked bread, scrubbed tiles, lit candles, desperate rituals to keep the air familiar. Then one afternoon I found Margaret's car parked at the end of the drive. She was inside, engine off, just staring at the windows. I stepped outside, heart pounding. She rolled down her window and said, almost gently, "It's time, dear. You've done well keeping it warm for us." "For us?" I repeated. "The buyers," she said. "Lovely couple. They'll bring life back into these walls." "I live here," I said. "My things, my life, everything's inside." Her smile didn't falter. "That's why I told them you'd stay through the transition. It's less abrupt that way." I felt the world tilt. She had arranged everything. The papers, the sale, even my removal, disguised as kindness. That night, the lights flickered and the house groaned like it was exhaling for the last time. I locked every door, even the ones that never needed locking. Somewhere between sleep and waking, I heard footsteps on the porch. I called Daniel, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Then I heard Margaret's voice outside, calm and steady. "Don't be dramatic, dear. It's only property." I pressed my back against the door, whispering to the house like it could hear me. "You're mine," I said. "You've always been mine." The air thickened, the floorboards trembled, and in that moment I realized the house was listening. I didn't sleep that night. The house shifted around me like an animal trying to get comfortable in a too tight space. Every creak felt deliberate. By dawn, I'd brewed coffee 3 times and drunk none of it. Daniel finally called, his voice thick with exhaustion. "She told me you were overreacting," he said. I laughed, too sharply. "Then she's already rewriting the story," I said. "She always starts with the narrative." Silence hummed between us. "I'll come home," he finally said. But by the time he did, Margaret had already been there. The "for sale" sign stood on the lawn like a blade. White, clean, impersonal. My name wasn't on it anywhere. Daniel stood in the doorway staring at it, then at me. "She can't just," he began, then stopped, remembering she could. The papers were legal, airtight. He paced the living room like a man searching for exits in a maze he'd built himself. "I'll talk to her," he said. "No," I told him. "I will." I found her at her favorite cafe, sipping tea as if she'd been waiting for me. "You've always loved drama," she said when I sat down. "You're turning paperwork into poetry." I stared at her, trying to find even a flicker of remorse. "You sold my life," I said. She tilted her head. "Daniel's life. My son's future. You were only ever the caretaker." Her words slid into me with surgical precision. That was Margaret's gift. Her cruelty never raised its voice. "Why now?" I asked. She smiled. "Because you forgot the first rule of this family: everything returns to me." On the drive back, I kept glancing in the rear view mirror, half expecting her to be following me. When I reached home, the air felt different. The doors I'd locked were open. The scent of her perfume lingered faintly in the hall. She'd been inside. I ran my fingers along the wall and found an indentation where her portrait used to hang. She'd taken it. Or maybe she'd left it behind somewhere else, waiting for me to find it. That evening, Daniel tried to reason with me. "If we stay calm, maybe we can negotiate." But calm was no longer possible. The house seemed to reject him too, lights dimming when he entered a room, the heater cutting off mid-sentence. He started sleeping in the guest room to think. I started keeping notes in a small black book: times, sounds, changes. The date the mail stopped arriving in my name. The day our dog refused to enter the study. The moment I heard her voice again. Not from outside this time, but from the walls. At first it was a whisper, a low murmur threaded through the hum of the refrigerator. I couldn't make out words, just cadence. Then, one morning, clear as breath, I heard her say, "You'll leave soon." I froze. Daniel was already gone for work. The sound came from the vent near the floor. I crouched, listening. Silence, then faintly a laugh. I shut off the power to the whole house, but the laugh continued, mechanical and steady, until I covered my ears. That afternoon a delivery truck pulled up with boxes labeled for the new owners. The driver handed me a clipboard. "Margaret signed," he said. "Said you'd be here to supervise." My name was nowhere, only hers. I stood there, pen trembling, and signed it anyway, my name scrawled over her authority. I carried the boxes inside, stacked them in the foyer like evidence. That night, Daniel came home late. "You shouldn't have done that," he said when I told him. "She's saying you're sabotaging the sale." I stared at him. "And you believe her?" He didn't answer. His silence was worse than any accusation. It meant he was surrendering. Margaret was winning him back, one careful lie at a time. The next morning, I woke to find the "for sale" sign gone. In its place was a single sheet of paper taped to the door. "Final viewing tomorrow, noon." My heart stopped. I called Daniel. No answer. I called the agent. He said the buyers were very excited to move in. My house, my life, reduced to an appointment on someone's calendar. I walked through the room slowly, memorizing every detail. The chipped paint near the staircase, the faint stain from last winter's rain, the way the light fell across the kitchen counter. I whispered each memory aloud, as if the house could record them. "You remember, don't you?" I asked the walls. "You know I never left you." That night, I dreamed of Margaret standing in the hallway, holding a set of keys that jingled like bells. She smiled, handed them to me, then stepped backward through the wall as if it were water. When I woke, the keys were on my nightstand, cold, unfamiliar, and from the hallway came the sound of the front door unlocking itself. The click of the lock sounded too precise to be an accident. I stayed still, listening for footsteps, breath, anything that might prove someone else was in the house. Nothing. Just the slow expansion of wood as the night air cooled. When I finally moved toward the hall, every floorboard announced me. The door stood open an inch, a slice of cold outside air pushing through. Beyond it, the drive was empty, Margaret's car was gone, the streetlights humming in pale cones of light. I shut the door, turned the bolt twice, and leaned against it until my pulse slowed. Morning came gray and heavy. Daniel texted that he was staying with a client overnight. No apology, no explanation. I wandered the house like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. Every object looked slightly displaced. Chairs angled differently. A photograph turned face down. When I reached the living room, I saw a folder on the coffee table. Inside were documents stamped final sale agreement. Margaret's signature at the bottom, the ink still glistening. My name nowhere. I don't remember sitting down, but suddenly I was on the floor. The papers spread around me like fallen leaves. The radiator hissed and a whisper slipped out of it, soft as breath. "It's done. Darling." I pressed my hands over my ears. The voice stopped, but the echo remained inside my skull. For the first time I wondered if the house wasn't reacting to her. It was becoming her. I packed a small bag, ready to leave, yet every time I approached the door something in me froze. Outside meant defeat. Inside still meant belonging. I brewed tea, opened windows, tried to make the rooms feel like mine again. But midday light revealed something new, faint outlines of boot prints on the kitchen tiles, leading from the back door to the stairs. Too large for mine. Too recent to be Daniel's. I followed them up. They ended outside the guest room, Daniel's temporary refuge. I pushed the door open. His suitcase was gone. On the bed sat a small box, Margaret's handwriting looping across the lid for when she leaves. Inside lay a single brass key and a folded note. "Everything returns to me." The same words she'd spoken at the cafe. My throat tightened. She hadn't just sold the house. She'd reclaimed it, brick by brick, memory by memory. That evening, rain began to fall, slow and deliberate. I lit candles and turned on the radio for company, but every station dissolved into static. Then, through the noise, a woman's voice emerged, steady, clear. "She's still there," it said. Pause. "She doesn't know she's already gone." I lunged forward and shut it off. The silence afterward was worse, thick with something that listened back. I walked through the rooms reciting my name, my address, the date, as if these facts could hold the world together. When I reached the study, the walls seemed to breathe with me. For a moment I thought I saw a shadow, tall, still unmistakably hers, standing behind the desk. Then lightning flashed, and it vanished. In its place, the mirror above the fireplace showed not my reflection but the faint outline of two figures. Both me. One smiling, one terrified. The smiling one lifted her hand, slow, deliberate, as if inviting me forward. I backed away, whispering, "You can't have it." The glass shimmered, and somewhere deep in the house a door slammed on its own. The sound rolled through the corridors like thunder trapped indoors. When it faded, the air was charged, expectant. I realized the house was waiting. For a decision, for surrender, for someone to claim it. And in that charged silence I finally understood Margaret didn't just want possession. She wanted inheritance of the living kind, the kind that erases whoever came before. Rain hammered the roof. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. I went to the kitchen, poured another cup of untouched coffee, and stared out the window. Across the street, through the veil of rain, a car sat with its engine idling. Headlights off, silhouette still. I knew who it was. She hadn't left after all. She was waiting for me to open the door. The car engine kept running through the rain, steady as a heartbeat. I stood at the window long enough for the glass to fog with my breath. Every instinct told me not to move, not to give her the reaction she wanted. When I finally stepped back, the headlights snapped on, two cold white eyes cutting through the storm. Then, as if satisfied, the car rolled away, its taillights smearing red across the wet street. Morning brought a kind of false calm. The rain had washed everything clean, even the "for sale" notice on the mailbox looked freshly printed. I brewed coffee, pretending routine could be armor. The smell helped until I saw the envelope under the door, plain, white, addressed in a hand that imitated mine perfectly. Vacate within 72 hours, no signature, just a copy of the sale order and a new return address. Margaret's, of course. I tried calling Daniel again. Straight to voicemail. I sent a message. If you signed anything, tell me now. No answer. I scrolled through photos on my phone. The house at Christmas, Sophie's birthday. Margaret smiling in the background like a queen, allowing peasants a moment of joy. And I realized how carefully she'd positioned herself in every frame. Always centered, never accidental. The house was her stage, we'd just been the actors. By noon, strangers began to appear on the sidewalk, couples pointing, someone with a clipboard taking photos. I drew the curtains, but the sense of being observed seeped through the fabric. Every knock, every footstep outside made the walls tremble. I went to the basement, where it was quietest. Dust lay thick on the shelves. The air smelled of earth and old paint. I sat on the bottom step, listening. Somewhere behind the walls a faint humming began, rhythmic, mechanical. At first I thought it was the furnace, but it pulsed too evenly, like a machine waiting for instruction. Then I heard the click of the front door again. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. I climbed the stairs one at a time, heart pounding. The living room was empty. The door still locked from the inside. Yet a trail of water led across the floor, small droplets forming a line from the entrance to the hallway mirror. The mirror's surface shimmered slightly, as if it were breathing. My reflection seemed a fraction out of sync, lips moving a moment after I spoke. "You're not real," I whispered. The reflection smiled. I stumbled back, knocking over a vase. The crash broke whatever spell hung over the room. The reflection snapped into alignment, the air stilled. I told myself it was exhaustion, lack of sleep, the strain of losing control. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house had begun choosing sides. That night I packed essentials, documents, jewelry, a few photos, and left the bag by the door. But when I tried to sleep, the floorboards creaked as if someone were pacing outside my room. I lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, counting each sound. When I finally drifted off, a voice slipped through my dream. "It's not the house she sold. It's you." I woke with a start. The bag was gone. In its place sat the brass key from the earlier box, glinting in a strip of sunlight. I picked it up, half expecting it to burn. Instead, it felt warm, familiar. On its head was a number I'd never noticed before, 413. The old storage unit Margaret used decades ago. The one she'd told Daniel was emptied years back. By the time the sun cleared the clouds, I was already driving. The storage facility sat behind a chain-link fence at the edge of town, rows of rusted doors stretching into fog. Unit 413 waited at the far end. The lock opened easily, as if it had been expecting me. Inside, dust danced in thin shafts of light. Stacks of boxes labeled in Margaret's handwriting, deeds, personal, proof. I opened the top one and froze. Inside were photographs of me. Not just recent ones, childhood photos, school portraits, things she could never have had, each marked with small notes in her tidy script, good posture. Hesitant smile, easy to mold. At the bottom, a folder labeled transfer. I opened it and found copies of every document tied to the house, each signed in handwriting identical to mine. Forgeries, precise and practiced. A noise at the door made me spin around, footsteps in the gravel outside. I waited, breath held, but no one appeared. When I looked back, a new envelope lay atop the box, clean and dry despite the dust. Inside, one line written in blue ink. "If you want it back, come home." The drive back was a blur of rain and light. The house loomed ahead, windows bright, like it had been waiting awake. I parked and sat in the car for a long moment, the key clutched in my hand. The door opened before I reached it. Warm air spilled out, carrying the faint scent of Margaret's perfume. And from somewhere deep inside, her voice floated through the hall, calm, measured, certain. "You took what was mine. Now come see what's left of yours." The warmth from the open door wrapped around me like breath. For a moment, I almost convinced myself that the house was welcoming me home. Then I heard her heels on the wooden floor, each step unhurried, deliberate. Margaret appeared at the end of the hall in a cream coat, hair pinned back with surgical precision. She looked as if she'd just returned from an appointment rather than orchestrated a quiet war. "You came back," she said, voice smooth as the polished banister. "Good. How's his hate abandonment?" I didn't answer. My throat was too tight to risk words. I stepped inside, letting the door click shut behind me. The sound echoed like a seal breaking. "I found your little archive," I said finally. "In the storage unit." Her expression didn't change. "Then you understand. I'm only correcting a mistake." "What mistake?" She smiled, almost tender. "Thinking you could ever be part of this family." The words hung between us, heavy and cold. She moved to the living room, trailing her fingers along the wall, as if reacquainting herself with an old friend. I followed, unwilling to let her vanish into another corner of my life. "Daniel doesn't know what you've done," I said. "Oh, he knows enough. Men always do. They simply choose not to see until someone forces their eyes open." She turned, studying me. "Do you know why I sold it while you were still inside?" I shook my head. "So you'd feel it," she whispered. "That moment when a home stops belonging to you. It's like a heartbeat stopping, quiet, final. You can't hear it, but you know it's gone." Lightning flashed outside, turning her face into a chiaroscuro mask. For an instant she looked ageless, less woman than shadow. I felt a flicker of real fear, not of her body but of her certainty. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Recognition," she said simply. "This house was mine before you even met him. I raised him here. Buried parts of myself in these walls. And you waltzed in with your flowers and your curtains, pretending to make it better. You never understood. You were a guest. I'm just restoring order." I wanted to scream that she was insane, but something in the way she spoke, calm, measured, almost reasonable, made me hesitate. She believed every word. Then she walked to the fireplace and set a small bundle on the mantel, the brass key, now tied with a red ribbon. "This opens more than doors," she said. "It opens truth, if you're brave enough." Before I could respond, the lights flickered and she was gone. Not walked away, gone, as if the house had swallowed her. I searched every room, calling her name, but only the sound of rain answered. On the mantel, the key gleamed faintly. Against my better judgment, I took it. The moment I touched it, the air shifted. A low hum began in the walls, the same pulse I'd heard in the basement. The floor seemed to tilt under my feet. A door creaked open down the hall, the old storage closet that had been nailed shut since before we moved in. I walked toward it, the key hot in my palm. Inside, the air was colder. The space was small, lined with shelves of old photographs, deeds, receipts. A private archive of the house's memory. At the center stood a single framed picture of Daniel as a child, holding Margaret's hand. Behind them, a faint reflection in the window, another woman. Her face half visible, eerily familiar. I stumbled back. The glass cracked down the center, splitting their joined hands. Beneath the frame, a folder waited, labeled "Transfer of Custody, Elena Martin," my name, my birth date, my parents' signatures, and Margaret's as guardian. My mind reeled. She hadn't just known me as Daniel's wife. She'd known me long before. I flipped through the pages, my vision blurring. There were letters, reports, photographs of a small girl in foster care. Notes in Margaret's handwriting. Subject: responds well to routine. Avoid separation until compliant. I felt the air leave my lungs. It wasn't just obsession. It was ownership. Footsteps behind me, soft, deliberate. "You were always meant to come back," she said. Her reflection filled the broken glass beside mine. "You were never his to begin with. You were mine." I turned, heart pounding, but she was already fading into shadow, her outline dissolving like smoke. The last thing I heard before the room went dark was her voice, close to my ear. "You live in me, Alina. Not the other way around." When I woke, dawn was breaking through the windows. The folder lay open beside me, but half the pages were gone. The house was silent again, almost peaceful. I walked to the front door, intending to leave once and for all, but the brass key turned itself in my hand, clicking the lock shut. Outside, a new sign stood on the lawn, "Soeldi's occupied." And somewhere, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of her heels on the stairs. The heels on the stairs stopped halfway, as though waiting for my reaction. I refused to look up. Instead, I whispered, "You can keep the house, Margaret. You can't keep me." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. I crossed the hall to the kitchen, opened every window, and let in a rush of cold air. For the first time in weeks, the walls didn't seem to breathe with her. They just shivered. I found the old breaker box in the pantry and pulled the main switch. The house plunged into silence. No hum, no whisper, only rain tapping against the glass. I wanted her to feel that silence, to know I could still choose. In the half light, I gathered what remained of the forged papers and stuffed them into a bag. My plan was simple: reach the police, hand over evidence, force daylight into this madness. But as I stepped onto the porch, the world outside felt warped, as though I were moving through a photograph instead of air. The street was empty. Even the birds had gone. I walked to the gate, pressed my hand to the latch and froze. The metal was hot, too hot from a night of rain. The brass key in my pocket pulsed once, faintly. I dropped it into the dirt. The ground swallowed it with a soft hiss. When I turned back, the house looked smaller, older, stripped of its menace. A thin column of smoke curled from the chimney. Someone was making tea. I went inside. Margaret sat at the dining table, hair loose now, eyes calm. "You shut off my electricity," she said. "That was unkind." "I'm done playing," I told her. Her smile faltered. "Then prove you exist without me." For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I took out my phone and began photographing every document, every signature. She didn't stop me. She just watched, her fingers drumming a slow rhythm on the table. Tick, 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 like a clock marking time until a final move. When I reached for the folder labeled "Transfer of Custody," she stood. "That one stays." "It's mine." "It was," she said, "until you forgot who you were." The air rippled. The photographs on the walls flickered, showing different versions of the same rooms, furniture rearranged, strangers standing where we had stood. Layers of ownership, time folding over itself. I realized Margaret hadn't haunted the house, she'd preserved it, trapped every life that passed through, including mine. I slammed the folder shut and ran for the door. Wind roared through the hallway, voices overlapping, old, young, male, female, echoes of everyone she'd claimed. The front door flew open, light exploding in. Outside, the sky cleared to a pale gold. I stepped over the threshold, half expecting her to drag me back. Nothing. The sound died instantly, replaced by the hum of distant traffic. I walked down the drive barefoot, clutching the folder. Behind me, the house creaked once, like an exhale. At the police station, my story sounded absurd even to me. The officer flipped through the documents, frowned, and said most of the pages were blank. Only my own handwriting remained. Lists, notes, my signature scrawled repeatedly. Proof of obsession, not possession. By evening, I was sitting alone on a park bench, the folder empty beside me. My phone buzzed at a message from Daniel. "Mom passed this morning. Heart failure. I'm coming home." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. The next message arrived seconds later. "She left the house to you." The world tilted. Somewhere deep inside, I heard the faintest metallic click. The sound of a key turning. I looked up at the horizon, where the silhouette of the house was just visible beyond the trees. One upstairs window glowed with light. I whispered, "Not this time." but the wind carried back a single answer, soft and certain: home, Elena. Always home. When I returned to the house after Margaret's funeral, the air outside was unnaturally still, as though the whole street had been waiting for me to cross its boundary again. No birds, no wind, no curious neighbors peeking from behind curtains, just silence so thick it made my footsteps sound like intrusions on sacred ground. The keys, mine again, at least on paper, jangled against my palm as I stood at the gate. Daniel hadn't come. He'd said he couldn't bear it, that the memories were too raw. I knew better. He didn't want to see the truth of what his mother had become reflected in the walls she'd built. The path to the porch was littered with damp leaves, but the "Cell D" sign was gone, ripped clean from the ground as if by invisible hands. I told myself it was the wind, though the grass beneath it was untouched. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and lavender, the same scent Margaret used to drown herself in, and when I shut the door, the echo rolled through the hallway like a heartbeat returning to life. Every room I passed felt subtly rearranged, photographs missing from frames, furniture pushed a few inches off its mark, small adjustments that whispered, "I've been here even while you were away." I found the folder I'd taken from the police station lying neatly on the dining table, each page restored, crisp, unblemished, as if the fire that should have devoured them had been nothing but a dream. Atop the stack lay a letter sealed with wax. The handwriting was hers, elegant, assured. The deed is written in memory, not ink. I tore it open with shaking hands. There was only one line inside, written in blue ink. "You'll know what to do when the walls begin to speak again." I wanted to laugh, to burn it all right there, but the house seemed to lean closer, listening. I wandered upstairs, the floorboards sighing beneath me, and reached the room that had once been Sophie's, empty now except for her old rocking horse facing the window. Its head swayed gently, though there was no breeze. I whispered my daughter's name and, for the briefest moment, heard her laughter echo from the hall, small and bright, followed by another voice, lower, maternal, blending perfectly with mine until I couldn't tell them apart. Panic bloomed in my chest. I ran to the master bedroom, flung open the wardrobe, half expecting to see Margaret's cream coat hanging there, but only my clothes remained, and yet each hanger was tagged with a neat slip of paper, each marked approved. My knees nearly gave out. I stumbled to the window, desperate for light, for proof of the outside world, but the glass reflected only interior darkness, two figures, mine and hers, overlapping until we were one. I pressed my hand against it, and the surface rippled as if the reflection were made of water. A whisper rose behind me, my own voice repeating her phrase, "Everything returns to me." I spun around, but the room was empty except for a small silver ring gleaming on the dresser, engraved with my initials and a date years before I'd ever met Daniel. I picked it up, pulse hammering, and a wave of heat shot up my arm, a sudden flood of memories not mine but lived. Margaret's voice, Margaret's childhood home, Margaret standing in this same room, watching someone else vanish in her place. I dropped the ring and stumbled back. The walls seemed to pulse with light, faint veins of gold tracing through the plaster, converging behind the headboard where a new door had appeared, small, round, like the entrance to a vault. The brass key was gone from my pocket, yet somehow I knew it was waiting on the other side. My mind screamed to leave, but my body moved forward, compelled by the strange certainty that this was what she'd meant by "you'll know what to do." I stepped closer, each movement slowing as if the air had thickened around me, the pulse from the wall synchronizing with my own heartbeat until I couldn't tell which one was leading. The door, round and impossibly smooth, had no handle, only a keyhole glowing faintly from within. When I touched it, the surface trembled like skin under pressure, and the house sighed. A long, tired breath that seemed to carry decades of Margaret's whispering through its grain. I pressed my forehead to the wood. A rush of images flooded in: Margaret at 20, clutching an infant in a dark hallway; Margaret at 40, sealing a letter with wax; Margaret in her last days, lying in bed murmuring my name. I gasped and stumbled back. Her memories clung to me like smoke, warm and invasive. The letters, words, "The deed is written in memory, not ink," finally made sense. The house wasn't haunted in the way I'd feared. It was imprinted, coded with her thoughts. She hadn't died exactly. She had copied herself here. I said aloud, "You're not the house. You're what's left of wanting." The hum in the walls faltered. I seized the moment, slammed my palm against the keyhole, and the hidden lock gave way with a soft metallic sigh. Inside was a narrow passage lined with mirrors. My reflection repeated endlessly down the corridor, but none of them matched my movements exactly. Some turned late, some early, some smiled when I didn't. As I walked, the reflections began to change, showing not my face but hers. "You can't fight what made you," one said in Margaret's voice. "You're built from my silence." I kept walking until I reached the final mirror at the far end, taller than the rest, framed in tarnished gold. Something shimmered inside it, a flickering shape like firelight. I reached out, and my hand passed through the surface into warmth and brightness. On the other side was the house again, but new. Sunlight streaming, furniture restored, the scent of lemon polish and roses. Margaret stood by the window pouring tea, alive, serene, exactly as she'd been the first day I met her. "We've come full circle," she said, as if I were late to an appointment. "I told you everything returns." I wanted to shout, to break the illusion, but exhaustion dulled the impulse. "Why me?" I whispered. "Why all of this?" Her eyes softened, and for the first time there was something human in them. "Because I couldn't leave him to anyone who didn't understand what it means to belong to these walls. To me. But you do now. You feel it, don't you? The pull." The air thickened with that same humming, stronger now, vibrating through my chest. For a terrifying moment, I did feel it. The longing to stay, to merge with the stillness, to never question anything again. I forced my gaze away from hers, toward the window. The outside world shimmered like a distant mirage, but it was their trees, sky, the faint glimmer of a road. I said, "You're right, I understand." She smiled, satisfied, and turned her back. That was my chance. I reached into the bag and pulled out the silver ring, the one engraved with my initials. "You forgot something," I said, and hurled it at the mirror. The glass shattered, light flooding the room in a violent bloom. Margaret screamed. Not angry, but surprised, and the entire illusion buckled. The walls shook, the ceiling fractured, beams of daylight speared through. I ran. Behind me, her voice broke into fragments. "You'll never leave." And then silence. When I burst through the front door, the house stood empty, color drained from every surface. A single gust of wind swept through, and the door closed gently, like a book ending itself. I stood on the porch, breathing, watching dawn spread over the street. The world looked ordinary again, imperfect, alive. I walked down the path without looking back, the brass key no longer pulsing in my pocket, but cold, inert, just metal. For the first time in months, the house didn't call my name. I didn't go far that morning. I made it as far as the edge of town, where the asphalt turned to gravel and the air smelled like wet pine, and I pulled over because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. 3 missed calls from Daniel, a single unread message. The lawyer called. "The deed's been void for years. You own nothing." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Somewhere deep inside, I'd known the house would erase itself from every record the moment I stepped out. Margaret had written her will in the walls, not in law. Maybe that was her victory, making me understand that ownership was never about paper. The thought should have terrified me, but instead it calmed me. The morning light had a strange warmth, as if the world were finally breathing on its own again. I drove aimlessly for hours, watching the scenery flatten into endless fields, until the urge to look in the rearview mirror became unbearable. When I finally gave in, I expected to see only the road behind me. But for a flicker of a second, I saw a woman sitting in the back seat, face calm, eyes dark and knowing. Not Margaret, not entirely. Something quieter, almost protective. Then she was gone. I laughed, half mad, half relieved. Maybe she'd never meant to destroy me. Maybe she'd meant to hand me her obsession so she could finally rest. The car's radio sputtered to life on its own, crackling through static before landing on a voice reading an old property listing: 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, sold to Margaret Lowe, 1979. The signal faded. By the time I reached the next town, the sun was setting. I found a small motel with a flickering sign and checked in under a name I didn't recognize until I'd already signed it. Margaret Lowe. The clerk didn't notice. I carried my bag upstairs, turned the key, and paused in the doorway. The room was plain: 1 bed, a mirror, a window that overlooked nothing. But there was something faint in the wallpaper pattern. A curve. A mark. That looked like the outline of a keyhole. I stood there for a long time, heartbeat slow, until a breeze slipped through the window and moved the curtain just enough for the light to shift. The mark vanished. I exhaled. Somewhere far away the house stood quiet, its walls empty at last, or perhaps not. Perhaps it was waiting, patient as ever, for someone else to cross its threshold and listen. I switched off the light and let the dark come. The motel walls breathed in the dark. I woke around 3 in the morning to the faint sound of dripping water, steady and deliberate, like someone pacing beside the bed. The room felt smaller than it had when I'd fallen asleep, the air dense with humidity and something else. A quiet, expectant pressure, like the hush before confession. For a moment I thought I was back in the house, that all the escape, the driving, the distance had been a loop drawn by Margaret's hand. But then the neon light outside flickered through the blinds, sharp and pink, and I remembered where I was. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the silence around me wasn't empty. It was listening. I sat up, swung my legs over the side of the bed, and let my feet touch the cold floor. The sound of dripping stopped. My reflection in the mirror across the room was just a shadow, but the longer I stared, the more it began to move. Subtly, hesitatingly, like someone trying to decide whether to speak. I whispered, "You can't still be here." The reflection didn't answer, but the light shifted again, and for an instant the glass held 2 faces, mine and another overlapping. Older, tired, almost kind. I reached for the lamp and knocked it over in my haste, glass scattering across the floor. The sound broke the spell. When I looked again, there was only me, shaking, ridiculous, in an empty motel room with a broken lamp, and a name that wasn't mine written on the check and card. I told myself it was exhaustion. The body remembers trauma in strange ways. Maybe I was hallucinating her, because I needed to believe she was still tethered to me, that I hadn't just destroyed someone who, in her own warped way, loved us all too much. By morning, the motel was quiet again. I showered, dressed, and packed the few things I'd brought. On the dresser lay the brass key I'd sworn I left behind in the house, gleaming dully in the pale light. My pulse quickened. I didn't touch it. I slipped out, left the door ajar, and walked until the building was just another box of silence behind me. The town stretched ahead, ordinary people, ordinary streets, and yet every face I passed seemed to glance a little too long, as if recognizing something of her in me. Maybe they did. Margaret had woven herself into the rhythm of my thoughts so deeply that even in freedom, she echoed through me. I found a cafe near the edge of the square and sat by the window nursing a bitter coffee. I kept my hands wrapped around the cup for warmth, watching strangers pass, pretending to belong among them. Then, as I stirred the last of the sugar, something caught my eye on the cafe's notice board, a faded flyer for an estate sale. Low property. Final items for liquidation. The address was new. Not the house I'd known, but close enough that my stomach turned. They were selling what was left of her. I told myself not to go. I told myself to stay here, finish the coffee, call Daniel, tell him I was safe. Instead, I left a few crumpled bills on the counter and started walking. The road to the sale wound through fields where the fog rolled low, blurring the horizon. A dozen cars were already parked outside the gate. The new house was small, wooden, clearly old but lovingly maintained. I could imagine Margaret standing here once, appraising it the way she used to appraise people, calculating what could be improved, what could be owned. Inside, the rooms were filled with strangers murmuring over boxes of linens, old photographs, furniture that still smelled faintly of lavender and dust. I wandered through them like a ghost, fingers brushing the edges of her life. On a side table, near the back of the room, lay a photograph I'd never seen before. Margaret holding an infant. Not Daniel, not Sophie, not anyone I knew. Written on the back, "To my other daughter, when she is ready." My breath caught. The woman running the sale noticed me staring. "Strange, isn't it?" she said. "That one wasn't in the inventory." "Must have slipped through." I nodded, speechless. The air around me shimmered faintly, and for a second I could swear the house itself leaned closer, listening for what I'd do next. I tucked the photograph into my coat pocket before anyone could stop me. When I stepped back into the open air, the fog had lifted. The sun burned pale and low, washing the fields in gold. I stood there a long time, the photo warm in my hand, and finally whispered, "I'm ready." The wind carried the words away, but somewhere, distant, almost gentle, I thought I heard a voice answer, "Then come home." The road back to the coast felt endless, a ribbon of pale dust that never quite straightened, as though the earth itself wanted me to keep circling instead of arriving anywhere at all. I drove until the sky bruised into dusk, until the radio fell silent again, and still I couldn't shake the sense that each mile pulled me closer to something that had been waiting. Not Margaret, not the house, but the thing that lived between them, the pulse that had chosen me. When the highway ended at a broken signpost and a half-forgotten track, I stopped the car and stepped out. The air smelled of salt and iron, the ocean just beyond the cliffs, invisible but loud, constant as breathing. I followed the sound until the land dropped away beneath my feet. Below, scattered among the rocks, were the foundations of a house that had once stood here. Stone outlines, blackened beams, a fireplace still upright against nothing. I knew it instantly. It was Margaret's first home, the one she'd left behind long before Daniel was born, the one she'd buried in her stories, but never truly abandoned. I knelt beside the remains of the hearth and ran my hand over the scorched stones. They were warm. The photograph I'd taken from the sale was still in my pocket, its edges soft from the constant touch of my thumb. I laid it on the ground. Wind swept across the ruins, lifting ash that glimmered like dusted glass. And for a heartbeat, I thought I saw the faint silhouette of a woman standing in the doorway that wasn't there. Not ghostly, more like a memory so strong it had learned how to take shape. She didn't move closer, didn't speak, only lifted her hand once, as if in farewell, before dissolving into the salt mist. My chest ached with something sharp and clean. I whispered, "You can rest now." For the first time, the sea's roar softened, retreating into the distance. I turned back toward the road, but before I left I caught a glimpse of a single brass key half buried in the dirt. When I picked it up, the metal was cold, inert, nothing but weight and shape. I smiled, small, uncertain, and tossed it into the surf. Dawn found me walking along the beach, shoes in my hands, salt clinging to my hair. Each wave erased my footprints as soon as they appeared. And that felt right. Every trace of what I'd been slowly unmaking itself. For months I'd believed the house was my prison, Margaret my tormentor, but as the horizon bled from gray to gold I began to understand she'd been something stranger, a mirror of my own hunger to belong somewhere so completely it hurt. The key was gone. The ruins behind me already swallowed by fog, and yet I felt her everywhere. In the way the sea pressed against the land, in the quiet insistence of the wind, in the rhythm of my breath. By the time I reached the small town again, the world had resumed its ordinary pulse. A milk truck rattled past. A child laughed from an upstairs window. No one looked twice at me. I checked into another motel under my real name this time and wrote a letter to Daniel. I'm safe. I'm selling nothing, running nowhere. Don't come for me yet. I didn't mention the house or his mother. Some truths survive better without witnesses. That night I dreamed of Sophie playing in a garden that wasn't ours, the grass lit by a soft amber glow. Margaret stood at the edge of the frame, watching but not intruding, her face at peace, and, when I woke, the dream felt less like a warning than permission. I opened the window. The air carried the scent of rain and turned pages, the smell of beginnings. Somewhere out on the horizon a storm gathered, low thunder rolling like a heartbeat. I wasn't afraid. Whatever she'd left inside me was no longer a curse but a language, one I could finally choose how to speak. I packed my things at sunrise, left the room key on the table, and walked out without looking back. The road stretched ahead, unfamiliar and bright. For the first time, the silence that followed was mine,